I Googled it, but there's nothing good on Google. What?
That's cool. Like, I want to have a new friend.
I don't know what's supposed to be funny, but I don't know. Yeah, she said she'd babysitter. Cool. Hmm?
I just got a good workout in, so usually I get like every 2 minutes, hey, let me come do
I know, I
this.
saw you.
Like a half an hour out there, I'm like, well, how much did I actually work out then? I had to keep stopping. You have to this time. That was great. I even meditated for like 10 minutes.
Maybe you can get the garage cleaned out.
Maybe what?
You can get the garage cleaned out.
Not today.
Huh?
Not today.
Yeah. Hello. What?
Gonna make lunch now.
Great.
Thanks, bye. Can you hear it now? Can you tell me if you can hear it now? Okay. I'm gonna just stop this live stream and start another. All right. I'm Greg Farrar. This is the April 29th live stream. I just restarted this because somebody called in who was watching live and said, I'm just not getting sound. So I'm going to actually head off to my channel for a minute here and make sure that I can post the location of my new stream. I'll just tell people on the live stream to check for new streaming live now. Okay, yeah, indeed. Now I see. So the first stream was whacked. It was apparently picking up a Bluetooth headset, and so you just couldn't hear anything. And that's a shame. All right, so here we go again. Start from the top. The live stream, which I'm going to change here. Well, we'll figure out later which one's which. But let's go back to the country level. I'll go through it probably pretty quickly now because I just went through it for 15 minutes. Thank you, Isaac, for pointing out that somehow my audio was wrong. I know exactly how my audio was wrong. So I've turned off Bluetooth, and now I actually see in my display that it seems to be picking up the data from my microphone. I'm going to go back to my channel and see if it shows me streaming. I'm streaming from outdoors today also, so the sound is probably terrible. Okay, live now. It says I'm live now. If I click live now, it says it still says I've been streaming a while ago. If anyone's still live, post here that you're live, or that you can hear me. I do seem to be streaming, and maybe it just picked up and stopped again. All right, maybe it's the same stream. That'd be cool if it didn't just disconnect and reconnect. All right, great. Well, we have sound, so back to the countries. I'm just gonna zip through these. I will say the thing that I said here, which is that the new daily cases by country is looking very nice. It's looking like a landscape. We have hills in the background. There's a hill, there's a hill, there's a hill. Everything is hills here, which is great because when we started, everything was sloping upwards and to the right. There are very few now that are sloping upwards and to the right. One of them is Sweden, notable, since Sweden has not been cracking down as much as other countries. It is notable that most countries have recovered or turned the corner towards recovery. Sweden, as we'll see a little later, is beginning to turn the corner. It actually really has, according to the trend line. but it is it's not looking as good as the rest. The trend line doesn't quite believe that it's turned its corner yet, and maybe that's because they have not tried to flatten their curve quite as hard as the rest. They've been choosing to allow people to do things more and focus less on containing the number of infections, which is it's a reasonable balance. They get to choose. At least I'm not going to say it's not a reasonable balance, but the effect of that showing up from an infection standpoint may be that their line goes up where everyone else's line goes down. We'll look at this a little bit more. The news for countries is good. I finished rather quickly in my previous edition of today's live stream because the news is just good. There's nothing bad. Well, there's almost nothing bad here. Here's that zero line. Below that zero line, we see that most of the countries, I'd even say the vast majority of countries, are below zero and dropping. There's no country here that's rising, for the possible exception of Pakistan. And the only countries that are even above zero, no one above 10%, very few even above 5%. We do have Brazil and Pakistan. Brazil and Pakistan are the worst right now, but they only have a 7% growth in steady, the everyday growth. The rest, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Peru, and India, those they have positive growth, but they're heading towards recovery. Here we see Sweden, which actually, according to the rope chart, did cross zero almost a week ago. Did cross the zero line, and it's been showing a negative average growth day over day for a week. And Iran and UK, I guess, are the second worst ones. Israel is doing great, 20% growth and dropping. Spain is doing great, more than 10% growth and dropping. And the Netherlands and France and general Europe is doing very well. So the countries, they're just all doing well. And so we see now overall below zero for worldwide. The case, in fact, the latest day is even better. 13% growth day over day. We're trending downward as a world. We've turned the corner, and we are seeing fewer and fewer cases each day worldwide. I have a new graph, which I will show you. First, these are the number of tests. We have enough tests now. Not all countries are reporting tests, but we have enough to actually get some reasonable data from them. The test dating is sort of spotty. Some of these don't quite seem to go all the way to the end. Actually, this may be something I can fix. The not going all the way to the end thing is something that I was able to fix. We saw that a month ago in my early data, so these may actually be the latest days. Yeah, I think these are the latest days. These are, no, they're not. This is the 27th. Anyway, but still the trends are here. Before I show the top 25 countries, though, I want to show the 3 outliers among the smaller countries. Iceland, 14% of their population tested. Bahrain, 7% tested. Luxembourg, 7% tested. And then Lithuania with 4% tested. Now, maybe this is just the sort of thing you see where if you flip a coin 10 times in a row, now and then you're going to get 10 heads in a row. And what can you do? By the way, being outside also means that kids are playing, roosters are crowing, goats are bleating, and lots of exciting stuff happening around here. But it's better. It looks better than the basement, and I like it here better than the basement. So we'll just say that's part of comes with the territory. Living in an intentional community with roosters and lots of kids and people, and I like it here. And if you hate the noise, let me know. Okay. Interesting. Quite a delay, it says, but it's working. All right, well, so you may just see my talking head, and I hope that, let me know, Isaac, if the sound doesn't match what I'm pointing to, that's kind of a problem, and maybe I'll stop it for longer and restart it. If the sound just doesn't match what I'm saying, and like the way my mouth is moving, that's not as big a deal. All right, whatever. Maybe it's just going to be a technically challenged day. So those are the outliers. And if nothing else, I guess you just listen and you know what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is probably the words I'm saying are probably probably more important than the visuals I'm showing anyway, because this is my analysis. Now, if you look at the top 25 countries, no one's anywhere near 14%. We got 4% for Israel. We got Portugal, we got Germany, we got various others, Spain. These are all countries that are doing quite well. Russia, Belgium, Canada, and finally at the United States, we get 1.8%. So the United States is doing what maybe 8 times worse than the smallest countries. The smallest country that not the smallest countries. There are plenty of small countries doing poorly as well, but Iceland with 14% is beating everyone else, and so it just makes you wonder. The United States has more budget per capita, I assume, than Iceland. It may have more medical infrastructure per capita than Iceland. So why couldn't the United States do 14% of the population? No reason I can think of. If you look at New York, if New York were a state, well, if it were a country, it would be in the top 4, I think. Something like that. New York would be in the top 3 or 4. So certain of our states are doing very well. Others, not so well. And therefore, as a country, we're not doing so well. All right. It's a chaotic day here in COVID-19 trendland. Going to the states. New York, still the major contributor with New Jersey. The rest is just noise in some sense. Well, I think New York is something like 25% of the cases in the United States. So the other ones really do add up, but New York has a lot more than any other state. New York's trend line is looking great, trending downward. They used to have 11,000 in a day. Now we have 3,000 in a day. New York is looking great. 3,000 new cases in the latest day. New Jersey looking good, but not great. There are others that are looking pretty good as well. Let's zoom in a little bit. Uh-oh. Yeah, it's doing that thing. I'm just going to skip on to the per million. Let's see if it lets me zoom in on that. Here you can see New York per million is because it's dropping so much faster than everyone, it's really moved out of the top few. Oh no, it's going to do that here too. I'm going to reload this. This is clearly just a highly challenged live stream today. I'm going to just briefly hop back to the countries while that loads and just see what else interesting we can show. We can show that the death trends, as usual, very much match the case trends, which is why I don't really talk about the death trends, because they look just the same as the case trends. I did talk briefly in my failed attempt at today about the new antiviral. I won't get the name right, but let's say it's something like remdesivir, and it is the latest data from the trials is good, but not good in the sense that it does not appear to significantly statistically reduce deaths. And it doesn't improve the outcome in cases of death. This is very early data, so it could come up with a totally different answer from the same study or from later studies, but it does reduce the severity and the duration of the disease. So that's nice. That's important. Takes the load, helps people, and takes the load off the healthcare system, but doesn't help with deaths. And so that's not use of that drug is not why we're seeing the deaths happen at the same time as cases. I still don't know why the deaths don't lag the cases. You'd think you'd get the case, then you'd get a death, but you don't. I mean, you do, obviously, in the real world, but in the data, you don't. The deaths happen at the same time the cases happen. So it's got to be something about reporting deaths sooner than they report cases. All right, well, I'll try one more time to zoom in on this if it still refuses. All right, this time it worked. Back to the states, deaths per million, we see a few outliers here. It's very pleasant to say that ones heading upwards are outliers. Back in the day, the outliers would have been the ones turning downward. There weren't any of those. Illinois, however, hasn't obviously turned the corner. It's still headed upwards. We'll see in the next graph whether it really has. Iowa, headed upwards. Okay, good. The delay is not so bad, I hear from Isaac. Indiana headed upwards, but we see Connecticut Massachusetts, especially New York and New Jersey, both showing that very nice downward trend. This is nothing like what we see on the country level, where it looked like a bunch of hills. There are only a few hills. Here's another hill, Louisiana, Michigan. There are a few hills where they've peaked already and are turning downward, but clearly the United States is lagging the world, as we would expect. The United States got it later than Europe, certainly got it later than China, and which doesn't even show up in our analysis anymore, and got it later than South Korea, which has also gone from our top 25 countries. So this is really just the United States recovering in much the same way that that it did in Europe and elsewhere. The United States just caught it later. And we'll see with states like Illinois that caught it later, caught it after New York and New Jersey, that those will also be delayed. But New York is great news. This is why the United States is looking good in its overall numbers, is because New York is looking so good, and it's the majority of cases. It takes a lot of bad news from a lot of other states to outweigh New York seeing a 75% reduction, or threefold reduction in daily cases. Let's look at the rope chart, though. So we were seeing some pretty bad looking rope charts over the weekend. These have certainly gotten better. Here's the zero line. There are a couple of extraordinary states doing very badly, Colorado and Washington, with more than 10% growth and sharply upwards. We'll see what happens with those. Colorado, again, is one of the two states that really opened up first. And so if they're looking at this, they may be shaking their heads and saying, "We're not sure if we should have." Washington had come a long way towards recovery, and so its cases had dropped very significantly. And to see it heading up here, in some sense, isn't as bad as to see it at another state, because at least they have excess capacity. They were giving away people and ventilators to other people. They were so sure of their capacity, ability to handle a new resurgence. Well, now it looks like they've got one. They've got a new resurgence. We'll see if they really can handle it. Let's zoom in Washington for a minute. And the resurgence isn't terrible, but they had a 33%. Again, this is an average of 3 days, 33%, 30%. This actually is kind of terrible. They've had a few days below zero, but really Washington is looking pretty bad right now in its growth rates. So this is something I don't think we've really seen. Have we seen this? I can't remember another case where I said, "Hey, here was a place that had really gotten over it." I mean, look at it down here in the 30% reduction day after day, trending very well, and now here's a resurgence. We haven't seen this that I can recall this extremely. So Washington, not in the top 10. It certainly pulled back a long way, and so hopefully this will be a real test case of whether someone who's gotten over the first wave and has excess capacity in testing and in the healthcare system and in contact tracing, whether they can quickly put a lid on something like this before they rise back up. Let me see the daily cases for Washington, because this is going to be interesting. Is it actually anywhere near where it was? Now, data only goes back to March 15th, but at their worst, they were seeing 600 new cases a day. And they're not too far off that. They're seeing half that now, but in some pretty good data points in the most recent days. But it will not take long. If they're growing 30% a day, they're going to be back there in just a couple days, 2-3 days. So we'll keep a very close eye on Washington. Washington is looking alarming right now. But everyone else in Colorado also looking alarming. Let's take a closer look at Colorado on the total daily cases. Sometimes this doesn't mean much when you see a sudden uptick on the rope chart. It just means that sometimes what it means is there was a huge spike a few days ago. And that's really what we're seeing in Colorado. It's not that today is so bad or the recent days are so bad. It's that several days ago was really bad. And so suddenly they had this upswing again. We averaged 3 days together, and so this day and this day and this day together were quite bad. They averaged maybe 1,500 a day new cases, and so then when it came down here to 600, it seemed like, oh, Colorado's doing really well, and now we're starting to swing back from this low point to a slightly higher point, and now it looks like Colorado is starting to look slightly bad again. I don't see anything on this chart that really justifies the kind of alarm that's shown on the. Wait a minute, is this Colorado? Well, that doesn't do any good. I'm looking at the wrong state. Let's try again. Colorado. Is Colorado something to be worried about? Well, I will say that their two recent days are looking good, better. They're looking almost as though they've plateaued, but they've had 4 very bad days, 1,000 new cases, 700 new cases. So right now they're back to 400 new cases. Part of it is an artifact maybe of these very low days where they had these falsely low days. There's no way they had 0 cases, and so when those get averaged in, then it pulls the numbers down. It's really hard to say looking at this. I'll just say the rope chart is worried. The rope chart is worried. The rope chart says that we've seen 10% growth day over day. My guess from what we're seeing on the total cases chart is this is kind of an artifact of some of those 0 days and some of those exceptionally high days where we just happened to land on a place where the average of 3 days was really low yesterday and was really high today because of the zeros and because of some of those spikes. So we'll watch Colorado, but I'm not too worried. I don't believe that that's a legitimate trend that we're going to see continue, but we'll see. I know that yesterday Colorado wasn't looking so great either, and so we will see. Colorado, though, is one of the ones that opened up early. Everyone's opening now. A lot of places are starting to do that, so we're not going to be able to call out Colorado and Georgia for very much longer. But I will say there was some, I would say, alarmist headline that said Georgia's opening up and they just had a whole bunch of deaths and cases today. Well, yes, Georgia is opening up, and yes, Georgia had a bunch of deaths and cases today. But Georgia has deaths and cases every day, and by no means can the deaths today or the cases today be traced to the fact that they opened up a few days ago. The incubation period is 11 plus days. Really, you would expect the deaths to be even farther behind that when the case is first found. So we won't know anything about Georgia or Colorado. We won't know about the effects of them opening up for a couple weeks. So to say there's an implied causality in that headline that is completely unjustified and obviously false. Georgia opening up is not going to result in new cases today or even this week. If it results in new cases, I mean, it will result in new cases, but we won't know about them for a week. If it results in new reported cases, it'll be 2 weeks from now, a week from now, and that's going to be probably more than my analysis can really point to. But maybe in a week or two, if Georgia suddenly sees a huge spike in cases where other states don't, we can say, well, maybe it was because they opened up 2 weeks ago. But what we can say is there's this guidance from the federal government that says we probably shouldn't open up until we've seen a sustained downward trend for even a couple weeks, and that's certainly not it's not what we're seeing. Georgia maybe can make that argument. It turned the corner on average. It turned the corner around the 15th, and now here we are on the 28th. So Georgia could argue that they've seen a sustained downward trend for 2 weeks. Colorado, I don't think can. Yeah. So I think that the federal guidance, if I had to guess, is really saying that every single one of these points is below 0 for 2 weeks. And these are averages, so they might even be more radical than that and saying that every single day is below 0 for 2 weeks. And certainly Colorado isn't. Colorado has a lot of growth still in recent days. There are some below 0, but the milder version of that is to say that a trend line like this is pointing below zero after 2 weeks. And that's something that Georgia can claim. My trend line just barely pointing below zero and has hovered below zero for 2 weeks, even though we've had 3-day periods with 35% growth, including the most recent 3-day period. So Georgia is they're on the cutting edge, they're on the bleeding edge, and we'll see how hard it is for them. But again, we can't say anything right now except what their trend is. We can't guess at what effect these are gonna have on them for a few more weeks, really. But overall, the trend for states is broadly good. There's sort of this middle band from about Virginia down to about Connecticut, where there's a sense of it actually is a rope again. It's a continuation of this rope. That sub rope, that we'll just say the main rope, is centered below zero, is trending downward mostly. We have an exception with Michigan, which is slightly trending upwards right now, so maybe Michigan's going to have some trouble. And then we have these fraying strands here: Colorado, Washington, Indiana, and Illinois. None of them are hugely growing, like 20% growing, but Colorado and Washington certainly are growing above 10%, which is we really don't like to see. All of them trending upwards. These two, Indiana and Illinois, not too much to worry about, but they are growing 5% and not getting any better, so that's not good. And then on the bottom here, we see the strayed franz on the positive side, Louisiana, which has just been living down here perfectly at just exactly what we'd like to see, well below zero, and at a sustained well below zero. And Louisiana, which I think might have been something like 4th or 5th once, is now almost about to drop out of the top 10, doing very well. New York as well. New York is going to take a while to drop out of the top 10, I think, but it's got everything lined up for that to happen. It's not even one of these strands that's just suddenly burst out of the rope. It's been its own thing for some time now, and so New York's doing great. And the three that look like they could become these high-performing strands are Ohio, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So Rhode Island, with its exceptional testing, may be pulling itself out of the spin. Population tested by state. Here again we see Rhode Island as the leader. If Rhode Island were a country, it would be top 3 or 4 in the world in testing. Same with New York, top 3 or 4 in the world if it were a country, and it certainly is well ahead of all the states. Massachusetts and Louisiana doing very well. Let's see, Virginia's still the worst. Virginia's always the worst, but at least it's coming up on 1%. We know that it's possible to test 14%. It's been done. So all of these are mediocre in a sense, or at least they're not going to take gold in the 2021 Olympics in coronavirus testing, but this might be a bronze with luck. All the states can do better. We know we're trying. We haven't really succeeded. Rhode Island continues. Well, their latest point is actually slightly downward. Yesterday we said Rhode Island is probably so successful because CVS is there. And so there are reasons why Rhode Island can outperform the rest. Maybe, I don't know why Iceland can outperform the rest. Massachusetts is doing better and better day over day with testing. New York is stable, but it really doesn't need to do better than it's doing, I don't think. New York is doing fine. Tennessee, everyone's doing okay. The testing in the United States is okay. I will say that California is probably still doing kind of miserably. Not so much. Where is California? Compared to other states, when I blink it does this weird thing because California had this exceptionally high day, so it's kind of hard to see where it is. But the 500 line goes right through the middle of the pack, below the middle of the pack. California lands right on that 500 line. So yeah, California is middle of the pack, maybe lower middle of the pack. Not doing great. Let's go to California specifically. But I will say, California specifically, I don't think we pointed it out here, is doing well in terms of its growth curve. It's got the two things we want to see. It's got a 2% reduction each day. That's not much. Could easily turn around with just 1 or 2 bad days. In fact, No, that's Ohio. And it's headed downward. So California seems to be doing pretty well thanks to Los Angeles. Let's see how the rest of the state is doing. Los Angeles did have that short-term spike last weekend. Things were looking pretty bad at the state and county level. Not so bad anymore. Los Angeles still shows the trend line trending upward, but certainly looking at this mini trend, it's a little bit noisy, but it sure seems to me like this is good. We had a really bad few days, and now we've at least roughly rejoined this trend line. I think that Los Angeles is actually trending downward. We'll see on the rope chart. Riverside is trending downward visibly. San Diego, the rest of them are noise. Let's look at the rope chart. I'll actually look at per capita and see per capita. Los Angeles still is the worst per capita. Not still. Imperial was the worst per capita yesterday, I think. And so Imperial, has it had a good day? Did you have a good day, Imperial? Yes, it did. And that's been enough to bend it slightly downward. One day doesn't mean much. So Imperial and Los Angeles are still in a race to be the worst per capita, per million. Riverside, in total cases. Riverside and San Francisco looking pretty good. San Diego not looking quite so good. But let's look at the rope chart. I always really just want to see where things are going more than where they are. When you look at the rope chart compared to the way it was a few days ago, the rope chart is looking good. There's a whole lot of counties below zero. Counties where day over day the trend is day over day it's shrinking. The number of new cases is shrinking day over day. There are a few though that aren't. San Diego is growing fairly significantly, 10% and rising. San Diego is our worst county right now with a growth rate of 10% and rising. Some of these other ones, Marin, San Mateo, are not doing great. Fresno, San Francisco, they're all, with the exception of Fresno, which is actually heading towards zero, these are all at around 5% growth each day. We don't want to see positive growth, so that's bad, but at least they aren't accelerating, or barely. So those are the counties that are doing worse. Then we have this one that's Kern at 2%. It's at 2%, which isn't a bad growth rate. I mean, it has to be below zero, so that is a bad growth rate, but it's not 20%, which we sometimes see. It's got a low positive growth rate, but that growth rate is slightly rising. So news isn't too bad for Kern. Monterey appears to be crossing zero again. I believe it had before. Monterey is so small in cases that it flails around a bit, so nothing too much to worry about there, really. I will look at Santa Cruz because people care. No, I can't look at Santa Cruz because the cases are so small that there's nothing to say about it. And it doesn't show up in the top 25. So Santa Cruz, maybe its growth rate is terrible, maybe it's great, we can't tell, but what I can say is it has very few cases. And it's just below that line. So if its growth rate ever starts getting really bad, it'll show up in our top 25 again. Maybe I'll make it top 26 tomorrow, or 7, because I could, and it would bring Santa Cruz in here. But Santa Cruz just keeps doing so well that it keeps disappearing from our list. So that's a good thing. Best news is Santa Barbara, 30% drop day over day in new cases and accelerating. Sonoma, Imperial, dropping out of that very troublesome place it was in. This is the kind of regression to the mean we sometimes see, where if something does extremely well, it tends to do extremely poorly, and vice versa in the days to come, and then it kind of heads back to somewhere like 10% below, which is where we tend to see the middle of the rope. And that is where the middle of the rope is right now. I'd say it's at 5 to 10% overall reduction in new cases. So good. Sacramento. The news is good on this rope chart. There's nothing running away. There are some exceptional cases that are so exceptional that we don't necessarily believe they'll persist. There are some bad ones that certainly San Diego could be on its way to become a new epicenter. If there's one place here that I think realistically could be a new epicenter, just based on everything we've seen in the past of how these curves tend to move, it's San Diego. It's not likely to be Los Angeles, because when something recovers, it tends to stay recovered. maybe the releasing the lockdowns will undo some of the recoveries. But when lockdowns are in place, when something recovers, it tends to stay recovered. But San Diego never really has recovered. It's always been. Let's look at San Diego. It had a period below zero, but San Diego has. Yeah, I lie then. San Diego looked like it was recovering, and now it really looks like it's losing its grip. I don't know. I don't know, but yeah, I think there's a real clear trend down to below zero, and then it came back. So San Diego looks like it may be in trouble, or maybe it's just random. The last few days are a couple of good ones. We'll keep an eye on San Diego. Testing by county. Riverside leads, followed by San Francisco with almost 2%. Again, we know 14% is possible. Is it? Yeah, Rhode Island. If Rhode Island were a county of California, it would be far in the way in first place. So there's no obvious reason that Riverside or San Francisco couldn't be doing 5%, couldn't have done 5% of their population. But they haven't. And so here again, California doing mediocre testing, but this isn't too bad. Riverside and San Francisco, San Mateo and San Diego, Santa Clara and Los Angeles, they're all above 1% total tested. So that's the news. As we hoped, without any evidence, without any evidence, we hoped over the weekend we would see this happen, which is that these really troubling trends where the states and the counties were just blowing up universally across half of them. We hoped that would be a data anomaly, and we hoped that we would see by today that it was a data anomaly. And indeed, here we are, back where we were a week ago. We've kind of lost ground in some ways, where if the trends from a week ago had continued, we might have seen all the counties below zero by now, all the states below zero. That hasn't happened. We saw a real blip there, but at least we're back to the direction we like to be going. And maybe a week from now, we'll see all the counties and all the states below zero. On the other hand, a week from now, lockdowns have been lifted everywhere, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, and a lot of states will be taking more risks. So you would expect, well, certainly that will be a factor pushing these lines upwards. Hopefully there will be a stronger force of gravity pulling them downwards as more testing comes online, as people continue to use some degree of common sense in spite of lockdowns. As well, those are the main things, really. Maybe as the improved contact tracing comes online, more healthcare resources fewer healthcare resources are needed. Maybe there will be some more contact tracing resources available. There certainly is a lot of talk about that, hiring 100,000 people to call everyone who someone came in contact with. And then there are the apps. Let's not forget the apps. For those who aren't willing to turn away the keys to your privacy to the federal government, there will be apps that will help you. They will help you from infecting other people. They will help you from getting infected. It'll be a balance. I really hope they allow that decision to be made at the individual level, rather than imposing some sort of Chinese-style authoritarian cameras everywhere and apps everywhere, and you have to have a green QR code to go to Starbucks sort of thing. But I totally think it's possible that we can take a moderate approach where there's an app for that. You can take it if you want to protect yourself and the people you love, and a whole lot of people will opt to do that, at least for a few weeks. So that may also totally turn around the contact tracing, where as soon as someone gets it, the app just alerts everyone they talked to in the past 4 weeks, and then they all get tested, and it could be magic. It could be absolute magic. But there's certainly a privacy concern there that may derail the whole process. So that's the news. That's the news. April 29th, the news is very good at the country level relative to what we've seen. We're still in a pandemic. Tons of people are dying, so in some sense the news isn't good. But given what we see in the broader news, I'd say my news is better than what the broader news indicates, because the broader news is looking at the total cases. And so we see things like United States crossed 1 million, hair on fire. And that just doesn't matter to answer the question of where are we going. Yes, the United States crossed 1 million. That was bound to happen if the models were remotely correct. The real question is, are we going to cross 2 million? The answer is no. You heard it here. We're not going to cross 2 million. We're not going to have 2 million cases because the United States is trending downward. And so when you cross 1 million, it can sound like a very serious thing, and indeed it is. But the future is rosy, or at least slightly rosy. Rose-tinted? I don't think I'm wearing rose-tinted glasses and saying we're not going to cross 2 million cases in the United States. We're never going to reach 2 million cases in the United States because we've already peaked. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Or if we do reach 2 million cases, it will still be on a gradual downward trend that just takes so long to get there that we gradually get to 2 million. We're not seeing exponential growth. We're seeing fewer new cases every day in the United States. And many states are seeing that. And New York is absolutely seeing that. And many counties here are seeing that. And Los Angeles is absolutely seeing that. So the news is good. From my perspective, we're headed in the right direction. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Isaac, for letting me know that you couldn't hear me. Anyone who, I appreciate that. I don't have too many live listeners, so I appreciate those who listen live so that they can tell me when there's something fundamentally screwed up about the way the podcast is going. That happened one other time too. I forget what happened, but I just had to restart the whole thing. So I probably won't be streaming tomorrow, so I guess it's good I restarted the whole thing today because tomorrow is a travel day for me. And so you'll probably see me back on Friday. Thanks for listening.